Okay, so let's kick it right off. How would you describe survival mode?
Survival mode to me is the spot where we begin to believe that we are the only ones that are dealing with something. It leads to isolation, it leads to hopelessness, it leads to despair, it leads to questioning everything. And it basically, I think of what Satan would like to do to most of us is just to pull us away from any amount of community that we could have that would help us recover and just get us to be isolated and alone and with our thoughts only. And that is a very bad place to be because it's like a spiraling tornado just going down. And so that is survival mode for me.
I agree. That spiral can keep us stuck for a very long
Yes.
time. Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted, the podcast for those who are done performing, done people pleasing, and done living life on autopilot. I'm your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and this is where we create disruptive, unapologetic transformations for those who are ready to exit survival mode and reclaim their power. Every episode is your permission slip to burn the rule book, break the cycle, and finally build a life that feels like yours. So let's disrupt everything that's holding you back and start living life on your own terms. This is your trigger warning. This podcast is raw. It is real and it doesn't sugarcoat what it means to survive trauma, abuse, mental health battles, or even the aftermath of living in survival mode for too damn long. What you hear on Survival Mode Disrupted includes unfiltered stories, graphic details, and a vulnerable truth that may trigger some of the audience. Please prioritize your emotional safety. If something feels too heavy, pause, breathe, come back when you're ready or not at all. Your healing is yours to honor. These episodes are based on lived experience, not therapy sessions or clinical advice. Listening does not replace mental health treatment or constitute a coach client relationship. If you're in crisis, please seek immediate help from a licensed professional or contact your local emergency services. This space is built with care, but it's also built for truth and built for disruption. Take what you need, leave the rest, and most of all, trust yourself. If this podcast speaks to your soul, you don't have to do this work alone. Feel free to join our free Facebook community for high achieving women ready to break cycles and heal out loud. Join us at Disrupting Survival Mode on Facebook, or grab the book that started this movement, Exiting Survival Mode, raw step by step guide to help you identify, release, and rebuild from the survival patterns that have been keeping you stuck. Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted. I am your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and today we have Debbie with us. So, Debbie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and I'm super excited to be with you guys. My name is Debbie Simmons, and I have lots of wonderful titles. I get the wonderful title of the Legacy Architect, which is my coaching and speaking that I do to help people learn to live their legacies now so that they can leave them later. And then I also have the privilege of being a CEO of a nonprofit called Anchor Point, which impacts literally thousands of families each and every year. And then I get the wonderful title of mom to 9 adopted children and grandma. They call me Lolly to 15 children, grandchildren. So I get a lot of fun titles in there.
So tell us your story to and through survival mode.
Yeah. Okay. I've been on a journey for many, many years, but I would say one thing that I always wanted was to be a young grandma. And I've already told you I'm a grandma of 15, so I kind of gave away a little bit of the story. But I could not figure out. I knew I wanted to be a grandma of 15, and I'm a girl that gets things done. So I literally knew I had to find a guy, fall in love, get married, have children, then I could be a young grandma. And I set out to do that. I did go to college and I did get a degree, but I also found the guy, fell in love, got married, and then it was like, great, check, check, we're getting these checked off. And all of a sudden, I ran into infertility. And 4+ years of not being able to get pregnant really threw me for a loop for my identity as a person, as a woman, as a potential mom, and this desire that I had to be a grandma, you know. And I remember as we were going through this process, I remember we were getting to the very end of some infertility of fertility study trials, and I didn't get pregnant. And I was laying on the bed and I was like, I wish I was dead because I couldn't be the things that I had all this desire to be. And I'm a person who can control anything. So I mean, this was like super like weird, you know. And so I was very, very upset. And we had a couple of more tries. And on the very, very last try, we got pregnant. And we were excited because two different doctors, same day, two different types of ultrasounds told us we were pregnant with twins. And I was like, great, back on track to young grandma. I'll do it two at a time. We want four, all this good stuff. At 13 weeks, I my body started attempting to miscarry. And I remember driving to the emergency room thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't make it out of the first trimester, all this work, it's not going to work, you know, and all this stuff. And they were able to hear a heartbeat, but they didn't know if it was one or two. And they sent me home to wait for the weekend. And on Monday, we went to a high risk doctor. And while we're sitting in the lobby, I told my husband, I'm like, wouldn't it be funny if we went in there and they told us we're having triplets when we think we're fixing to lose them all? And he was like, yeah, that'd be funny. Ha ha. And I'm like, okay, so we go into the exam room and the lady puts the little probe on my stomach and I can immediately see three. And I'm like, oh, there's three. And my husband's just shaking his head. He doesn't know quite what to do. And she keeps looking and she's like, she does all her measurements and she says, hey, let's put all of them on the screen and take a picture, you know, an ultrasound picture for you for mom, and you'll have three. And I was like, okay. And she did. And as soon as she started to do that, I was like, oh, there's four. And I said, don't look for any more because this is high risk as it is. And it's, you know, it doesn't matter if there's five, six, seven, eight in there. It doesn't matter at this point. And she was like, I think I need to get the doctor. And I'm like, I bet. And my husband is shaking his head, trying to figure out what, because we had figured out how we were going to deal with two. And now, like, four is like, we don't know what we're going to do. And the doctor comes in, and the reason I had been attempting to miscarry was because I was not trying to nourish five of us, four babies and me. And so my body was just sending up warning signs. And so we adjusted everything and we continued on our journey. And the goal began to get those kids to 30 weeks. And so every day, you know, was a blessing to make it to the next day. And off we go. And we're just doing thing after thing after thing. At 26 weeks, I found myself standing in a pool of water. And I didn't understand at first, but it dawned on me that one of the baby's sacs had ruptured. And at that point, they admitted me to the hospital, and the goal was to still see if we could make it to 30 weeks, but I would be confined to a bed and, you know, all this stuff. And we get in the hospital the next morning. Contractions came crashing down, and I told my husband, you need to go get the doctor. The doctor came in and checked, and one of the babies had taken his hand and stuck it through my stitched cervix and was waving to the world, I'm coming. Hello. And I am looking at the doctor going, no, this is too soon. It can't happen. push the hand back, stop everything. No, 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 no. And the doctor is, no, you have to deliver the baby. And I'm like, no, because you no, because I knew that medical technology back then was not good enough to save the babies. And so I just was shocked. And my husband asked the question, what about the other three? And she said, we'll have to see what Debbie's body does. And so they whisked me off into surgery, back into the room to wait. And several hours later, little Zach arrived. And when he arrived, they placed him in my arms. And I held him and I rocked him and I loved him until he drifted off into eternity. And then we waited with empty arms and time. And we waited and waited. And a few hours later, the doctor walked back in and she said, you have to induce. You're getting too sick. And I had a really bad fever. My blood work was a mess. My body was getting toxic. And she said, you have to induce. And I just looked up at her for just some glimpse of hope that, she just was out of her mind. And she shook her head and said, no, you have to. And I closed my eyes and breathed and literally resolved again to figure my way through it. And shortly thereafter, Josh, then Nate, and then Chris each came and they placed them in my arms and I held them and I rocked them and I loved them till they drifted into eternity. And then after that, empty arms and broken hearts, we sat. You don't go to the hospital to deliver and end up planning 4 funerals. It's just not on your plan. And I remember clearly that night, it wasn't just the loss of the boys, it was also the loss of my dream of being this young grandma, and my identity and everything is just wrapped up in all of this. And I remember just trying to go, how in the world am I going to get through this? I don't understand. I don't know how. It's too hard. I don't know what I'm doing. I'd like, what. And I just in my mind played through every scenario I could kind of think of like, how do I survive this? Right. And the only thing I could come down to was that I had to trust God with my situation. That's the only thing I could come to. I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't know anywhere else to turn. And so I'm like, okay, God, I'm going to trust you. I don't, but why? And so what I found is that all of us, when we face difficult things, the number one question that we ask is why. And so that night I'm like, why me? Why this? Why my boys? Why? And what I have found is God whispered to me that night. He's like, you have to give me your why. And I'm like, no. This is all I have left. You owe me this answer. You owe it to me because if I have the answer, I can figure my way through this. It'll make it okay. I can figure my way through. And he's like, you have to give me the why. And I'm like, no. And so I fought it. I was just like, no, this is all, because it literally, I have no babies, I have no nothing. I'm just that. And finally, I just said, fine, I'll give you my why. And I said, but what in the heck do I do now? Because that was my best plan. And he's like, ask me a different question. And I'm like, what? I don't know. I don't know what to ask. And he said, ask me, how do I survive? And so that's the question I started asking because what I realized is if God Himself would have stood at the edge of my bed that night and would have given me the answer to my why question, do you know what my very next question would be? Why? Because that's not going to be a good enough answer. And so, this side of heaven, there is no answer that will satisfy or bring my boys back or help me figure my way. Nothing will answer the why question to my satisfaction. And so laying it down allows me to be able to then move because why keeps me inward focused, it isolates me, it does all these things. And so I began asking that question, how do I survive? And it came down to I needed to breathe and I needed to take my next best step. So some forward motion. And it wasn't like these were like huge steps because some mornings it might be just pull the covers off of my head and get up, brush my teeth, walk around for 5 minutes and get back into bed. Okay. And then other times it might be bigger things and then eventually going back to work and doing these things. And this is how my healing process started. And as I got better, then the question became not just how do I survive, because I wanted desperately to live. I wanted to feel, I wanted to have joy, I wanted to be an impact player. And I just was like, God, you say you're a redeemer of stories. Then I want you to teach me, how do I thrive? If I give you my story, how can I thrive? And he took that story and he said, okay, you can start working with people who've lost children. You can start working with these kind of families. You can lead grief groups. You can do all these things. It led to us adopting the 9 children, which was a different plan, but it still was one that we have thoroughly enjoyed and loved. It led to God planting the seed to start the ministry that we have that's now 15 years old that impacts thousands of families every year. It led to the writing of the book, The Heart of Legacy, to help people learn how to be focused, faithful, and fearless in their lives and leaving legacies. And it leads to my speaking and all this stuff. So, all of those things came out of the pain of losing the boys and their legacy continuing to live on through me, but also being willing to lay down that why. And so that is, my journey through a difficult season into this next kind of phase of life. So that's it.
Thank you for sharing. And your story to me is the epitome of from pain to purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I see a lot in this space with my guests or even with the clients that I work with is the freedom that comes when we are able to tap into our purpose through the journey of healing
Mm-hmm.
beyond our pain.
Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer that everything serves a purpose. Everything is a stepping stone to our destiny. And what is interesting in your whole story was changing the question. And I think a lot of times, particularly people who have worked on the healing, right? Like not ones that are still very knee deep in the sinking sand that can be survival made, but those who have clawed their way out and really championed their own healing. It's most of them, their journey was a direct road to what they then saw as their purpose. And that's what I see
Mm-hmm.
very much so with your story. Um, as someone who's dealt with infertility issues, as someone who's also dealt with late miscarriages as well, I do understand that pain and the pause that comes behind that, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you learn about these babies,
Mm-hmm.
you start preparing for them in
Yeah.
earnest, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you go from being this person to this mother overnight. And
Yeah.
although we don't hold our babies during that period, that's the anticipation. It
Yeah.
shifts us as women, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then to have all of these hopes and dreams fade
Yeah.
as you hold your babies.
Mm-hmm.
But to look at what you're doing now, and it's all about legacy and what you're leaving behind. It's so important. But the other thing that I took away from your story is being able to anchor into God and that relationship that you had, to
Mm-hmm.
keep you moving forward instead of allowing that to be a permanent stoplight for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Because I know people who lost children 30 years ago and they're still stuck. And I'm going, I just did not want to be that. I had too much, we have too much life to live and too much impact that we can make. And I just was, I was adamant. I'm going to figure my way. And that's what I went after.
Hmm. And in the work that you're doing, what do you think is the biggest aha moment that people often have as they journey through grief?
The biggest moment to me, to me, for most people, they don't realize that isolation is a killer. And it is only through community that we learn to heal. It's only when I have people hear my story and still look in my eyes and see my preciousness and go, you're worth it. You can do this. And we have to have those people. If not, we're left to ourselves and the tapes that play in our head only get worse. And so, when we realize we have to find safe people that we can tell our story to, and we're going to, the first time you tell your story, it's not going to be all nice and clean like mine just was. But I've told it thousands of times, right? And it's going to be, probably ugly and crying and this and everything else. But as I walk through that, the aha is the release that I get because people still love me and find value in me. So that doesn't mean I go on the street corner and tell everyone. It means who are my safe people, right? And so finding those people and telling your story and telling your story and telling your story over and over again is the power of healing. And what Satan really meant for bad, God can turn for something very good. And we just have to trust him with that. And that is the thing that we're looking for, right? And I think my husband has a great I can't remember where he heard it, but we quote it all the time, is this little boy had this fascination with ponies. And his parents thought it was crazy, and he was getting a little obsessed and all this stuff. So for Christmas one year, they gave him a big bag of manure, okay, thinking that this would stop this boy's fascination with these horses and all this stuff. And the little boy got the bag of manure and he was so excited, he started digging through it and just digging through it and digging through it. And they were like, "What are you doing? And this is like not supposed to be like this." And he goes, "There's so much manure here. There's got to be a pony somewhere." And so are we willing to dig for the pony? And so I love that story because I'm like, I'm looking for a pony. I don't know where it is, but I'm gonna find that sucker.
That's such a good analogy, actually. And
Yeah,
and and you raised an important point when you talked about being able to find that safe space and our people to share our stories in. One of the reasons why I started this podcast and leaned into storytelling was because I recognize the power of a story. It creates community, whether or not we recognize it or not.
yeah,
And being able to connect with somebody on an emotional level, like I could have 100 experts come on and talk to people about what it looks like to exit survival mode. But it takes one person to come on and we resonate heavily with their story, where it triggers us to say, well, if they could do it, I can do it too, right?
yeah.
And
Hmm.
and I think it's so important when we lean into our stories. I remember when I first started my business about 6 years ago, I hired a coach. And the coach had said to me, when we're on these calls, you're absolutely amazing. You're a big personality. Like you take up the whole room. And then I see you online and you are like this shell of yourself. And we dug into it a bit deeper. And when I first started my business, I was in life coaching. And I pivoted, and I'm now kind of back here in a different way. But I was held hostage by my story for a very long time.
Hmm.
And I remember her telling me, your story is the master class for someone else. I didn't see that at first, but she encouraged me to tell my story 50 times in 6 months. And
Oh,
at
okay.
first, I was like, 50 times? Like, who's gonna want to hear my story 50 times?
Uh-huh.
Um, in that 6 month period, I told my story 150 times.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it moved me exponentially
Mm-hmm.
because not only was I able to, through telling my story, identify the areas in which I still needed healing, it also helped me to come to terms with my story, hearing the feedback from the people who received it.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment I realized how much power was attached to the experiences that I had and my ability to stand on the other side and say, I survived this,
Yeah.
and now I am looking to help others survive too.
Yeah. And I think the key is that you and I know our stories. I've lived
Mhm.
with my story for 30 plus years. And so I go, it can't be that big of an impact because I've heard it a billion times now, right? But for you, it's the first time that you've heard it. And the impact, I mean, and so I had to learn even to slow down on telling it because people were so emotionally moved that I was like, oh, they're in the hospital room. And I'm like, I survived that. It's okay. And they're still like trying to feel, and I'm like going, people just haven't heard it. So when we say tell it 100, times or whatever, it is fresh and new and encouraging to people. And it's a story that never gets old. And, it only seems like it's old to us because we're the ones telling it over and over and over again. And so we just have to remember the fresh eyes. That's why the feedback is so powerful to help us realize the power of the redemption of that story, and how it can help someone else.
Absolutely. And oftentimes we diminish our story as well, right? Like
Mhm.
uh it's not that big of a deal. And even still, I've sat here and I've interviewed over 100 people at this point. And very similar to you, like I would be, you know, I'm gasping. That's one of the reasons why I mute myself because I'm very audible with my reaction, right? Like I gasp and I've literally sat here behind the mic and bawled my eyes out. And
Mhm.
people are like, oh, yeah, I made it through. It's okay. But
Mhm.
it's so powerful. And again, storytelling allows us to connect in such an emotional way. And sometimes it's just that emotion that our stories can evoke in others that
Mhm.
triggers them to take
Mhm.
to take action.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Totally.
Absolutely. So Debbie, tell us a bit more about the things that you're doing, your nonprofit, how we can find you
Yeah.
online, your book, all the jazz.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. Well, first of all, if you want to learn more about the ministry that we run, it's called anchorpoint.us, and we'll give you all the social media handles and everything. But it is a great, wonderful ministry that encourages families. And no matter where you are in the world, you can join like our 911 prayer line and be a prayer for the ministry as things happen. And I go, that makes a ton of difference. Even if you're not here, you can be a part of that. So feel free to join us in that. We would love that. I also, as a legacy architect, do coaching and speaking. And so that is thedebbieSimmons.com. But I also have a free gift for your audience, and that is my book. They can get that at theheartoflegacy.com, and it's free to all of them, but it is a wonderful, wonderful next step if you don't know how to get to where you want to go next. And so it's chock full in the middle of concepts that are around focus and finish and fearless, to help you figure out these next best steps you can take. And then I've loaded it with stories of life change of girls that's lives have been radically changed through the ministry at the end as a way to encourage people. So I just would say get that book as a wonderful next step at theheartoflegacy.com, and it will be a blessing to you.
Oh, beautiful. We'll make sure all of the details are in the show notes. But before we wrap it all up, Debbie, one key takeaway that the audience can action.
Yeah. Okay. So my thing would be is figure out, first of all, breathe, but figure out what your next best step can be. And it doesn't have to be big, whether it's someone in an accountable group, but just positive movement. Because when we take positive movement, we step out in faith and obedience. God meets us. He lights the path at our feet. And then we step out in obedience again, and he does it again. This is how your faith muscle grows. But always be assured that the sun comes up tomorrow. And tomorrow is a new day. And so, no matter how many steps forward, or maybe we went a little backwards, that we can begin again. And that is the journey of healing. And you are not beyond hope. You're worth it.
Absolutely. Debbie, thank you so much for your time on Survival Made Disrupted and sharing such a powerful story and audience. You're worth it. Thank
Yeah.
you for catching another episode. I just want to remind you, you were not built to break, but you damn sure were not built to just survive. Disrupt the cycle, reclaim your life, and thrive on your own terms. And I'll see you next week. Once again, thank you for joining another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted, hosted by the Survival Mode Disruptor, Letitia. You didn't land here by accident. This conversation, it probably cracked something open on purpose. Because survival mode isn't just a phase, it's a pattern, an identity, a prison masked as strength. But here's the truth. You're not broken, you're just unfinished. So if something stirred in you today, don't ignore it, don't numb it, move with it. And I want to once again invite you to join Disrupting Survival Mode, the Facebook community where healing is loud and messy and real. I also want to invite you to buy my book, The Survival Mode Exit Plan, because your breakthrough deserves a blueprint. And if you felt seen today, be sure to share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and drop a review. That's how I amplify the voices that need to be heard. And remember, this isn't about fixing yourself. This is about finding yourself again beneath the rubble. Until next time, choose ease, choose power, choose you. This is Survival Made Disrupted. Let's keep shaking shit up.